Welcome everybody to this community announcement about making autonomous vehicle accessible to all. I'm Antoine Mer, I'm the head of the Paris office of Conseil et Recherche, and I'm joined by Yann Arnaud. Yann, you are the director of Meeting Customer Needs division at MACIF, and you are the head of the digital working group at the French Insurance Federation. My first question, Yann, will be why has MACIF decided to initiate this community of interest about autonomous vehicles?
Probably the first image you have in mind when you talk about autonomous vehicle, and probably the first image you saw about the autonomous vehicle was a man, a single man, an executive man driving a premium car on a motorway and leaving the steering wheel to read his newspaper. At MACIF, we quite quickly had a doubt about this image, and our idea was to say that in another way, which would be a shared electric autonomous shuttle, it would be more interesting for people. And around this idea, we decided to gather a lot of experts and to create this community of interest, because we were convinced at this moment that the future and the emergence of the autonomous vehicle would come from an ecosystem reflection, and we decided to create this community of interest within the Movin'On.
Interesting. And why is an insurer like MACIF interested in this topic?
Both because we are an insurer, but also a mutual. So as an insurer, we are really concerned about mobility, about cars, about the evolution of vehicles, but also as a mutual, we are really involved in all new forms of mobility, soft mobility, car sharing, and other topics like this. We are really supporting these new forms of mobility. And we really had the impression that the autonomous vehicle would be maybe a new solution that can be added to existing solution. In fact, to provide more comfort, more ability for people to move. And it was very interesting for us as a mutual.
And what are the main goals of this community of interest?
The main goals of this community is to get away from a purely technological prism of the subject, which was really what was the case when we decided to enter the subject. All documents, all studies, all analysis were focused on the technological aspects, and very few were talking about the social aspects of autonomous vehicles. So the first idea was to really bring a new reflection on this aspect of this subject. Just because we were convinced that the solution and the key driver would come from the consumer and the user. And the second goal was to really think about the use of this autonomous vehicle. What would be the use of an autonomous vehicle, especially in some specific area like sparsely populated areas or suburbs or small cities and so on. The last goal was also to take into account something that was really important for the people, and that is still really important, a sustainable aspect and inclusion. So you discussed with all these experts coming from major companies, coming from all the parts involved in this, that may be part of the future autonomous vehicle solution, and you have several workshops, several exchanges around this, and all this is summarized in this report, this document, a quite massive document. Yes. Could you tell us about key findings, key ideas that are included in this document?
Burning question was how to make autonomous vehicle solution for inclusive mobility and sustainable mobility. The impact of autonomous vehicles on the environment and on sustainable mobility. There is a small controversy on the topic because there is some fears about the risk of urban sprawling, about
traffic jams
and so on. Exactly. So what we know for sure is that right now 29% of CO2 emission in France comes from transportation, and globally it's 24%. So it's a key challenge to fight global warming. And what we discover during our exchanges, it's a fact that the environmental impact of autonomous mobility will depend on the deployment strategies that will prevail at the end. And there is three main scenarios. The first one will be personal autonomous vehicles, and it's the worst case because you increase the number of cars and you increase pollution and so on. The second scenario will be on-demand mobility with driverless taxi and so on. It's not the best scenario because it will be in competition with public transport system in large city and so on. So it's not.
It will concern city centers where a lot of solutions are already available.
Yes, and not rural areas. And the last scenario, it's the most virtuous one. It's public transport mobility, where autonomous shuttle, autonomous vehicle will be included in public transport system, and it's the most virtuous scenario that will enable a reduction of CO2 emission. If environmental issues are key, it's also important to consider the inclusiveness of autonomous mobility, because it's always a social challenge. In France, there was a lot of social unrest regarding mobility issues. There was a lot of public consultation regarding this topic, and it underlined the fact that during the past decades, most investments have been made in urban public transport system, interurban connection, and big projects like the high-speed train in France and so on. And it was detrimental to daily mobilities, the mobilities that people need in rural areas and so on. So it's really important. It's really an important concern for this community of interest.
But
yes.
What you say is that at the moment, for a large part of the French population, mobility is a problem.
Yes, for 50 million people, mobility is a problem. And it's really important because if you have no access to mobility, you will have difficulties to find employment, to go to universities, to go to health institutions, and so on. So it's really a key social challenge. And in our work, we consider two aspects of inclusion. The first one is social inclusion, to promote new mobility for disabled people, senior people, and so on. And the other aspect is territorial inclusivity, which is also an important part to fight the gap between large city and rural areas. And to most of the reflections regarding the future of autonomous mobility are framed by an urban framework. They consider autonomous shuttle within city center and so on. And there is really a blind spot in a way regarding the reflection of what could autonomous mobility brings in rural areas or suburban regions.
At the moment, we feel a kind of a strange impression, which is the subject 2 or 3 years ago to talk about the autonomous vehicle. And we have the impression today that it is a second order subject, that it is not so important. Is it due to difficulties? Is it due to lack of interest of people? What do you think about the way the subject of autonomous vehicle is at the moment?
It was one of the key parts of our discussion, and finally, autonomous vehicle followed the classical hype curve, regarding the adoption of innovation. And there was a strong fear of disruption a few years ago after the announcement being made by Google and
even for insurers,
I'm sure. And a lot of companies, of car manufacturers, invest a lot of money to develop the autonomous technology, and they realize all the technical difficulties that are still there to create a mobility services, and a lot of people start to ask about the viability of those investments. And they try to understand what will be the acceptability also of this new mobility solution. Acceptability is really key for the future of autonomous mobility, but it also underlines the need to have a broader approach of ethical issues around autonomous mobility, because all the ethical debate regarding autonomous car is dominated by the trolley dilemma, and this trolley with no brakes, and he has to choose between a young child or an old grandma to kill. So it's an illusion to focus the ethical dilemma on this specific issue. What we need is a broader approach which will consider the organization of our society, how do we organize our cities, and the idea with this general approach is not to do the same mistakes we make in the 60s when we designed all our cities around individual cars and so on. So
just a quick reminder about investment. If you consider that return on investment will be brought by premium cars, probably that there is something that is not well balanced between the amount of investment and a very small number of car concerned. So this is why probably a new model is more efficient on this.
Indeed, and it's why also it's key to consider progressiveness in the deployment of autonomous mobility, to start with simple use cases and to progressively include autonomous shuttle in public transport system and so on. Because the fear of the disruption is also related to the fact that autonomous mobility will bring a major revolution to the mobility sector. You mentioned the exponential cost required to develop such kind of technology. It also changed all the design process to make such kind of car, because you do not design a car, but you design a mobility services, so it changed really a lot of things, and it changed the business models that you have to build and so on. And one of the key aspects of this revolution is the new importance of data, and it will play a key role in the viability of the investment being made in the development of autonomous mobility. But as an insurer, perhaps you could expand a bit on the consequences of autonomous mobility for the insurance sector.
Yeah, and this was one of the drivers that make MACIF think about the subject. What we think about how we change our industry as insurers is the fact that what we see is that the risk will probably go from an individual risk, each one is a good or bad driver, to a serial risk. So it means that if there is a problem on a model from an EOM, probably it will appear quite a number of time in a very short period, and this is something that we have in mind at the moment. So it means that for MACIF, but also all insurers involved in this community of interest, probably we need to anticipate that our work will go from covering a single risk to something that will be how can we deal with a serial risk. So it means finding between insurers new forms of cooperation, partnership, but also sharing the risk between us on a very economic ways to do our work well. Regarding the victim, it will not change a lot of things, and this is something that is quite good for the people, to say that because of, in France, la loi Banater, with protecting all pedestrians and people, physical people, it means that when you are talking about a classical vehicle or an autonomous vehicle, it will not change the game, because there will always be an insurer just close to the victim and to pay for all reconstruction he will need. So this is not on this part that is really changing the things, the autonomous vehicle, but on the way that the risk will change, and we have to really consider this.
Also, the key roles that government has to play in the deployment of autonomous mobility. You mentioned all the legal issues in a way, and the legal challenges, because the notion of driver will change. The next mobility solution, it's local authorities. Sometimes they are considered as too small and
with no money.
No money, yes, indeed. But they will have really, and it's one of the main results of our community, they will have to play a key role because they will have to provide mobility services, they will have to regulate new mobilities, they will have to manage infrastructure, they will have to enforce public order. So it will be, they will have to play a key role for the emergence of this new mobility solution.
They are very motivated for a lot of these authorities to do that because they are facing the problems. They want to provide new solutions and new mobility solutions for the customers who are inhabitants of their cities, of their territories, and so on. They have also a key role to make things easy to implement and to be part of this of the solution. So this is clearly something true.
Indeed. Ian, what are the next steps for this community of interest?
So in 2020, and this is of course the content of the report, really we made a very deep analysis on what was the autonomous vehicle, the context, because one of the paradoxes you underline is that we are talking about the autonomous vehicle, but in fact it will be understood as the environment, the complete environment, not a single physical element, the vehicle, but also all that will, the constraints and so on. But from the beginning we know that in fact we have proof of what we are thinking to test things. A live experimentation would be necessary, probably. In order to do that, we have to really try to work on how can a new autonomous vehicle solution can be implemented in territories. So 2021 is focused on preparing a coming experiment, trying to study how local authorities, what they want around it, or what they think about the difficulties and good things that it can bring and so on. So preparing and then launching an experiment, but not launching a new experiment.
And to conclude, how do you assess the result already produced by the community?
I'm quite proud about this content because I think it is really, in all aspects, and because it was not analyzed before, a really rich and new original insight for people who are thinking around this. What is important is that the way we enter the subject is quite new. Questioning all that was the mainstream ideas around this technological object in cities. We say that no, probably the solution would be a very effective solution for people very close to their needs, to their actual needs, in suburbs or sparsely populated areas. And around this, what is done is something that was not easy at the beginning when we launched this concept, this idea of concept of a shared electric shuttle used in this type of areas. A lot of people were quite reluctant. A lot of doubt about the fact that it can be that it can find an economic viability. We are sure that it can find an economic viability because duplication from a country and, for example, a common supervision of its vehicles and so on can be a way to see things that can bring this autonomous vehicle.
Thank you very much, Ian.
My pleasure.
I'm sure that you have understood that the motto of this community of interest is mobility for all, autonomy for all, and we hope to see you next year with new results.